Okay, a little bit about myself. You know what? Do you mind if I'll take a selfie first? Okay, everybody say Firebase! Firebase! Seriously? Okay, a little bit about myself. My name is Idan. I'm working at a little startup in Tel Aviv called UVI. What we do is we scan vehicles and we do image analysis to find problems with the vehicles. It's really awesome. We use amazing algorithms. We use amazing equipment to take the pictures, but I just do the UI, so I get all the credit because that's what everyone sees, and I really enjoy it. I'll show you. It also relates to what I'm about to show you because I'm going to give you a really amazing tool to help you concentrate on the UI and not focus so much on the backend. A little confession, backend is not my strong side. My back is strong, but backend is not my strong side. I don't really like it. You can't wow people with a nice backend. You can show them a really nice app and they'll go wow, or a website and wow, it's amazing. But no one ever was amazed by JSON or an API. It's just not that thrilling. So I'll show you a few tricks to allow you to avoid all those unfun parts. Okay. So, what we're going to talk about today is Angular and Firebase. Now, just to make it clear, those are both completely separate products. You can use Angular without Firebase. You can use Firebase without Angular. You can use it with React. You can use it with vanilla JavaScript. And you can use Angular with Java backend, PHP backend, if you're unlucky. They're completely separate products, but they work amazing together for a few reasons. First of all, they both come from Google. And I think that in some senses, they represent Google's vision of a front-end, back-end architecture and how data flow should work and how easy it should be to develop such an architecture. Second, they're both JavaScript, or TypeScript to be exact, which is even better, that allows you to share code between the back-end and the front-end, to share types between the backend and the frontend. It really helps expedite development. That's really nice. And last but not least, data flow. Angular is strongly entangled with observables. I'll talk about it some more later. And Firebase is based on WebSockets. WebSockets, unlike regular HTTP endpoint, when you do a REST request and you get a response, WebSockets allow you to stream data a long time, changing data. And on the Angular side, observables allow you to reflect those changes in your client side, because handling WebSockets in your client side could be a little bit problematic. What do you do when something changes? You need to invoke some function, you need to create all sorts of logic. It's a big headache, but once you use observables, which I'll show you in a second, everything becomes much easier. Observables allow you to reflect data in your UI, in your client side, much easier, especially changing data, which most data does change. Okay, so what Firebase actually does, let's step into the fire. It gives you a lot of services that usually people had to build by themselves and create by themselves. And if you think about it, most of the things up here are pretty much generic. You don't need to invent the wheel every time. Firebase gives you all of that. Now, before I continue, I want to show you I want to show you a small example of a pretty big application. Now, you probably wonder, how many servers do I keep in the backend to allow at times thousands of people to log in simultaneously? How many instances do I need? How do I deploy the Docker? How do I And how big of a team built this? Now, you've been to conventions like this before, you know the answer. It's 0. I did everything by myself, and it has no backend. I didn't build one line of backend. Everything was provided to me by Firebase, and I really want to show you how I did it. Let's step into the fire. Okay, so just a few words about what Firebase actually does. It does abstraction. It takes the same events you all use, the same actions you all use in your systems, and it abstracts it because you all feel like your backend is some kind of a special and unique snowflake. Well, it's not. Update actions and deployments are pretty much standard. They're pretty much generic, and there's no reason to invent the wheel every time. And if you take a look, if you think about it, that's the movement the entire industry is doing. We started with servers. Each server had to be configured individually. And we moved up to VM and Dockers, which is another level of abstraction. And now the latest word is serverless, which is somewhere up there in the clouds. You don't even have to worry about it. And if you give me a few more seconds, I find it very amusing that the same movement of abstraction happened with religion as well. We started with animism. We worshipped plants and rocks. We continued to multiple gods. And then we invented monotheism, which is also in the clouds. This is a really fun coincidence. No, I don't want to. So let's start abstracting and see how Firebase did it, and did it so well. So let's look at the basic update flow. You all know this. It's basic UI making a request to the backend, and the backend returns a response to the UI. But if you're a bit experienced, you know that this is a lie. This is a complete lie. Nothing really looks like this unless you live in a pink bunny land fantasy world. Because a real update flow looks a little bit like this. The UI makes a request to an endpoint. You have to set up the endpoint in advance. It's some kind of a URL, which invokes some kind of a function that you have to build in the controller that queries the database, which returns a result set, which the controller wraps in a data object, which the endpoint returns to the UI. Now, your bunny isn't so happy now. It's a bit sad, but even this is pretty much optimistic when you think about it. Let's consider user management. Then the endpoint has to go to the user management, ask for permission. Can the user actually do this? And return a response, and only then invoke the controller. And I didn't even mention what happens when he doesn't have permission, or you have any issues, so error handling, and tests, and CI/CD, and scaling. What happens when 10,000 people do this at the same time? And security. So from the happy bunny land, we moved to a dead bunny. He lost his joy of life, and nothing really matters anymore, and you're a depressed developer. I want to make you a happy developer. I want to take the dead bunny and make a happy bunny. I want to take this nightmare of a flow and get back to this optimistic utopian flow. Can I do that? Well, Firebase actually really gave me amazing tools to do exactly that. Let's take a look, only 15 minutes into the presentation, to a little piece of code. Okay, it's time we dive into it. So, can I actually do something like this and develop an entire system? Let's take a look at what Firebase does. First of all, it provides this. Okay, I'll point at it. First of all, it provides me this DB object. You all see this DB thingy? It's a simple package that is provided by Firebase. This is the JavaScript version. You have iOS, you have Android, Java, but this is the JavaScript version. Firebase provides you this DB object. You have to set up the credentials before. I'll show you later how you do that. But once you have this DB object, you're Superman. You can do anything. Let's see what I do here. A simple update or create a flow. And it's almost self-explanatory. In the DB, go to the collection users and add this data object. If you succeed, do some console log. If you fail, do something like that. Now, where's the endpoint? Where's the function? Did I create a database? Did I create a collection? Does the user have permission? I really don't care. I don't care about all of that. All I want to do is add something to my database. And this is how you do it. It's that simple. And if you don't believe me, let's do a little live demo, which I like best because sometimes they fail and the tension is... I like the thrill, I like the hype. Okay. So, just before I jump into the live demo, let's see what I actually didn't do here when I wrote this piece of code. I didn't create an endpoint. I don't care where it goes. I don't need to create a REST, a /user/add. I don't need to create that. I don't need to create a controller to catch it and do something with it. I don't have to worry about the database. I don't have to worry about the authorization. I don't have to worry about error handling. I don't have to worry about tests because you know this will work. It goes into Google servers. I'm sure they have tests. CI/CD is not an issue because it's so simple. I'll show it to you in a second. Scaling, I don't care if I do one request or 10,000 requests. That's Google's problem, not mine. They should handle it. And security, their servers are pretty secure. If not, it's not a Firebase issue, it's a humanity issue. Okay, so let's do a little live demo. I don't care about you anymore. So, I'll start with the Firebase console. This is a lovely place to start, very friendly, very nice user experience. All you need is a Google user. If you don't have a Google user, why are you here? Okay. This is an Angular app. If any of you haven't tried it yet, it's unbelievably simple. Just install the Angular CLI and do ng-new my app. This is what you get. This is what you get, but I did a few minor changes. Let's go over them. So right now, I'm sure you can't see it, but I'm in the app module file. This is the entry point to any Angular application. And again, nothing special I created here. It's what comes out of the box when you do ng-new. All I did was imported a nice module that Firebase provides me, the Angular file module, and I initialize it with an environment parameter called Firebase. Let's take a look at it. I set it up earlier. Now, all this seemingly very complicated information was retrieved by the developer's favorite action, copy-paste. I went to my Firebase console. When you want to integrate your Firebase to an app, you just click here. You can integrate it with an iOS app. You can integrate it with an Android app. Or in my case, I want to integrate it with a web app. So I click here and I get this data and I simply paste it here. Now, this data isn't confidential. This is no more than the endpoint to your backend. It only means that you know where your backend is. It doesn't mean you have permission to talk to it. Permission is a whole different issue. I'll go back to it in a second. But this is not confidential. You can copy it. It's in your client-side code and it's completely fine because all it represents is the endpoint to your Firebase. So where does the action begin? Let's start with the simplest thing, the HTML. I have a title here. I think this should work. At least this should work. I have an input field, which is called message. This is the Angular way of referring to an element. And I have a button, which has a click event, which, when clicked, invokes the on button clicked function. Nothing too complicated here. And I just pass this function the value of the message. This is the message, I just pass the value. Any questions still now? Cool. So let's take a look at what the on button click does. Now you may recognize this code from 2 minutes earlier. I showed it to you in one of the slides. This is almost the exact same code, only a bit more angular. The DB object is imported as a service. This is how you import services into your, inject services into your component in Angular. And now I have it, if you remember, I set it up in the app module when I initialized Firebase. So now I just have this DB object and I can do whatever I want with it. In this case, I want to go to the collection messages. This is typing, makes your life much easier. This is how I tell them what the data object should look like. If you want to take a look at it, this is how a message looks like, nothing too special, text and some date field. And if we get back to our function, okay, go to the messages collection and add this data. The message which was provided as a parameter to the function earlier, if you remember, and a date. If it succeeds, console log something. If it doesn't, console error something else. Okay, let's test it. I'll do ngserve. Now you all know that I'm using Angular 6 even though there's Angular 7. I think 8 is out already, or is it in late beta? Anyone knows? It's all the same. No, they have a few nice. Okay, here we go. Just to make sure this is the actual live demo, I'll just add an exclamation point here, save it, and you can see how it reflects in the UI immediately. Okay, let's write something. Like, hi, send, and I see in my console, can you see the console? The document written, this is the success message. Let's check our Firebase console, make sure that it's really there. I'll go into the database. And suddenly I have the message collection. Earlier I didn't even have it, but now it has a single document. I didn't have to create the collection earlier. It now somehow magically exists, and it has a single document in it with the message I just wrote. Okay, not the most amazing thing you've ever seen. Yeah, that's nice, I didn't have to set up anything, but it's not that impressive yet. You came all the way here. You want to see some real juice. Let's improve our app a little bit more. I'll add a list of the messages we have. This is an HTML list. This is the Angular way to iterate over something. And I'll iterate over the messages object. What's this object? What does it represent? What does it have? I'll show you in a second, but a little hint you can see by the $sign at the end of it. This is a convention for saying this is not an actual object, because when you iterate over something, you'd expect it to be an array or something like that. No, this means this is an observable. An observable is connected to a data stream that changes over time, and every time the data changes, you don't have to do anything. The ng4 with the async pipe, which I'll show you in a second, creates a contract between the backend and your UI that makes sure that every time that something changes in the backend, it would reflect automatically here in the UI. This is what the async pipe does. Another cool thing by Angular that makes your life much easier. You don't even have to subscribe to this observable. And once you iterate over it, just print out the message property from your object. Now let's take a look on how I connected this magical being, this magical observable, to my backend. Firebase makes my life much easier. Very easy. Let's take a look how it's done. So first of all, I set the type. This is a very nice thing to do when you use a TypeScript application. First of all, you set the type. It doesn't have anything yet. It's just telling the application this is what I would expect for it to have. An observable that carries a payload of an array of messages. It may be a little bit weird to look at first, but once you get used to TypeScript, this is very easy. And this is where I actually put something in it, in my on init. So when the app initializes, the messages is populated by. Let's go over this one. You already know the DB object. This is something I got for free from Firebase. You even know the collection function, which again passes the messages collection. But this time, earlier I used the add method. Now I use the value changes method. This is a Firebase convention. This function, this method, value changes, provides me with the observable that reflects any changes that will be made to this collection. Let's see it in action. Oh, another last thing, I also pass a query parameter. This is completely optional, but I want to talk to you about queries a little bit later. So here's a small example. I pass a query function that all it does is creates an order by rule, order by date. Nothing too fancy. And now let's see it in action. I'll save it. Hey, this is the high from earlier. And I'll do one more thing, 1, 2, 3. Hey, amazing, it reflects here. But if you think about it, this little thing I built here is much more powerful than it looks, because once we have an observable that is connected to a backend, changes to the backend can happen from everywhere. So if you will, please take out your iPhones or whatever else you have. And go over here. Let's have some fun. In case your QR code doesn't work well, you can always type this address. Are you done? Okay, let's see how it looks. Whoa, you're fast. Okay, Android rules, who wrote that? I'll add the authentication later and then I can trace you. Oh, and there's always the one that tried to do an XSS hack. Angular gives you for free a sanitization to your HTML, so you can try hack it as much as you want. It won't work. Or it will work, because you won't be able to ruin it. Salute. Ooh. Hey, Dad? Is my son here? I don't have a son. Not that I'm aware of. Okay, so let's take 42. Nice. I like the reference. Okay, you can keep having fun with it, but I want to just make sure you understand what just happened here. We created a live chat that, I know, tens of people just logged in. It works seamlessly, and it only took like, what, 6, 7 lines of code, something like that, and any of it was too hard, too complicated? No, it was amazingly easy, because what we did here isn't that special. And Firebase took this requirement and allows us to implement it really, really easily, really nicely, and in a very self-explanatory code. This allows you to take it even further and create all apps like the CRM I just showed you. It wasn't built by Salesforce, it wasn't built by SAP, it was built by me. And I got some really nice money for it. You're crazy. Okay, let's get back to the presentation. You can keep playing with the chat. Okay, so this is a bunch of links to excellent resources that I've used to learn the Firebase. My personal recommendation, don't just look at it and say you know Firebase like I did with Vue.js. I did a tutorial and then I updated my LinkedIn page saying I know Vue now. No, I think you should really sink your hands into it and face real-world problems to say that you actually know a framework. And I'm sure most of you have some kind of an idea of a side project. Most of you are UI client-side developers and you're afraid of the backend. Don't be afraid anymore. If you have an idea, if you have a startup, if you have some kind of thing you always wanted to create and didn't have time or energy or will to create the backend for it, now you can do it like that. Okay, so I really recommend open your own Firebase project. It's really cheap, it's even free. To a certain degree, what I built here was completely free. And create your ideas, go for it. Go now, leave. But if you'll say, I'll talk a little bit more about Firebase, even though most of what I'm going to show you right now, the documentation explains much better than me, but let's go over it really quickly. So, the database, it's an NoSQL database, so its basic entity is a document. A Firebase document could be a flat JavaScript object, or it could be a nested object, like any other JavaScript object. And you can refer to it, you know, the DB, sorry. You know the DB object, so you can refer to it either by pointing at the collection and then pointing at the specific document, or you can call it by a shorter syntax that allows you to connect directly from the doc method. Now, as you can see, all I pass here is a string. So it's actually very powerful because instead of a string, you can pass some kind of a variable, which allows you to create dynamic objects, dynamic observables. It's really nice and makes your life much easier. Now, documents, as you know, are organized inside collections. And you already know how to refer to a collection, but another nice thing that Firebase provides you, which other NoSQL databases don't, is sub-collections. You can actually create a collection inside of a document, inside of a collection. And then you can create a collection inside of a document, inside of a collection, inside of a document, inside of a collection. And so on and so on. This could be useful in certain cases, but planning how your data structure looks like is probably the hardest part. It requires some experience, I had to rebuild a few parts of my app when I understood that I created the wrong architecture. So take a time, do some kind of a dry run, imagine how your app will work, and then design your data structure. There are tons of ways to design it. You can have arrays inside of documents that represent objects. There's tons of ways. It's schemaless, so you can do whatever you want. It's a plus on one side, but it's a minus on the other because you can go wrong really easily. But that's why they pay money. That's your job. I mentioned queries earlier. You can do really nice queries in Firebase. You can chain a few queries together, like where state and where the name equals Denver. You can use special parameters like array contains in the second version. What you can't do yet, because of a Firebase rule regarding indexes, don't worry about it, is you can't chain two where clauses that uses a comparison. So I can't use state is greater than and population is greater than, greater equals than. You also can't use all. You can't use join, but there are ways to solve those issues on your client side. The Firebase documentation gives you really nice examples on how to do that, but basically because you use observables, Observables are mergeable. You can do all sorts of actions with them. So worst case, you can do two queries, have two observables, and then join them together into a third observable that will represent the data from the first two observables. You can, as you've seen earlier, use your query function to order by, and again, you can chain a few, with an order by, with a limit if you want to create some kind of pagination, that's really nice. But again, you can't chain two actions that involve comparison, but you can always do it on your client side. Basically, it's an array. You can sort it. There's a sort function to arrays in JavaScript. Okay, I mentioned earlier authorization. All of you just uploaded data to my database, to my live chat without even... I forgot about it. Okay, give me one more second. Okay, let's take a small look about the authorization and authentication. So I created a little sign-in component. Let's see it in action. Wait, don't look, don't look, don't look. Okay. So let's take a look at this sign-in component. We'll start with the HTML. It has two parts in it. This is the Angular way of saying if this, do that, if not, do else. So I'm taking the user object, again with the async pipe, which means it's an observable. If the user updates their picture somewhere or their name, it will reflect in the UI immediately because you're connected to the observable. Nothing you should do, it happens automatically. And this is a little bit of Angular magic syntax, represents the result as a user. And if you don't have a user, just show the show login. This is the show login, which has a title, Hello Anonymous, and again a button, if you remember we used button earlier, which has a click event that calls the sign-in function. Now, let's see it in action. Before we look at the code, let's see it in action. So here's the sign-in button. When I click it, it sends me to the Google login page. I'll just log in right here. And now it says, hello, Idan Cohen. I have the user object in my client side. I can do whatever I want with it right now. So let's see how I did it. How did I connect to Google authentication? What did I use? It was probably very complicated. Let's take a look at it. So this is the sign-in method. I'll go in. And I did it with a single line of code, ladies and gentlemen. A single line of code that did everything for me. Because logging in is not something that special. It happens every day, tens of millions of times. And there's no reason to make it more complicated than a single line of code. Just log in, the log out is similar, just sign out. One thing I had to do before that was to go into my Firebase console, and in the authentication area, I have plenty of sign-in methods. I enabled Google, but you can enable a ton of other, your own, very own email password authentication. Phone authentication, which is my favorite, it just sends you SMS. You're limited to like 10,000 SMS a month for the free version. And Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Microsoft, and even anonymous login, which sounds like a paradox, but it's actually really nice. It creates an anonymous user object that you can later use when the user actually does log in or does register to your app. You can continue the same flow with the same data object, with the same user. The user ID won't change once a user changes from anonymous to a registered user, and it creates a beautiful user experience. Imagine you have a store. An anonymous user adds items to their cart list, to their cart, and he hasn't logged in yet. You don't want to force him to log in just to add the items to his cart. But once he logs in, he still has the exact same cart. That's the user experience anonymous user can provide you. We'll get back to the presentation. So once you have the user object, you can actually use authorization to let the Firebase know what each user can do. So, as you can see, it has a very simple syntax. Allow read-write if some condition. Let's take a look at an example of a condition. A condition could be like if the user has a user ID. If he doesn't, he can't do some sort of an action. I'll go back a little bit. And you can separate it. Some users can read, some users can write, different permissions. You can even go down even further and say you can get a specific document, but you can't list the entire collection. You can create, update, delete. It's very, you can fine-tune it to your needs. You can also use the data itself to decide whether it's updatable, whether it has permission. Like if your document has a visibility property, which you invented, that is public, then people can read it. Otherwise, they can't. You can even use permissions to enforce your schema. For example, allow update only if the update request contains a population greater than 0. You should enforce it in your client side, but you can also do it like this. Authorization, I'll skip it, yada yada yada. Cloud function. Okay, cloud function is the most awesome thing. If you've noticed, some of you probably noticed that each and every message you wrote ended up with an exclamation mark. That's not because you're all very excited, which I hope you are. So how did the exclamation point got here? Now I can use the UI to just add it, but you've seen my UI, I don't have it. I can use the add method to add the exclamation point, but you've seen my add method, it doesn't have it. So where does this exclamation point come from? Let's take a quick look at the code again, and I have the functions here, and I have a function called, very originally, add exclamation. And what it does, it is being triggered every time there's an onCreate event to the message collection. And what it does, it takes the value of the message and it adds an exclamation point and it writes it back to the backend. Now, this is a very simple example, but you can smell the power you will have once you start using cloud functions. A few examples of very nice cloud functions. First of all, they can be triggered by database events, authentication events, storage events, even simple HTTP endpoint requests can trigger a function, which is useful in some cases. For example, when if you actually create a chat app, you want to send a push notification every time someone mentions your name or something like that. So you can create a cloud function that is triggered every time a new message is added to the messages collection. And the function sends it to the Firebase cloud messaging service. This is the service that actually creates the push message. And another cool example is to sanitize your data. This is similar to what you've seen with the exclamation point. Every time the database is updated, read the incoming message, do something with it, and write it back to the database. And be careful not to create an endless loop here. It is possible. You can use it to, when a user uploads some kind of a document or an image, you can process it using outside the services or even your Node. Even though it's not recommended, Node is to orchestrate stuff, not to do heavy lifting. You can even use it as you remember I said it has an HTTP trigger, so GitHub can have a webhook that triggers a function that says to the Slack team, to your group in Slack that something happened. This is an example of a function, and that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. Please, I thrive on feedback, so on the back of your little chain there's a feedback place. Please tell me that you love me, I thrive on it. I have very low self-esteem, I need this, please. Come on, tackle me.